To add projectiles to your character, you're going to want to start to go to the top right here under projectiles and select new. For this particular animation, I want this robot character to fire a missile, so we'll be adding a missile. And to do that, you'll just click new, and here is your projectile. I'm going to name it missile. Actually, I'm going to name it bullet. So now, simply click just to the right of the name in this area, and you are now in your projectile here. The first thing you can do is keep in mind that this little central ball is kind of where the center of your projectile should be. So if you'd like, you can start by creating a new sprite layer and simply drawing the projectile if you'd like. But I want something more sophisticated than what I can draw in this time, so I'm actually going to import an existing bullet sprite that I already have. I'm simply going to click it, and I'm going to click and drag it right in the right spot. Kind of make it centered about there. That should be good. Next, we're going to want to add some hitboxes to this. So let's go ahead and add a new timeline and select hitboxes. And then down here, we can select new from this side drop down. When it comes to hitboxes for projectiles, you can either have the projectile itself do the damage, or upon being destroyed, the explosion can cause the damage, because when this hitbox gets activated, we're actually going to move on to our destroy animation here, and that's what's going to do the damage. So I'm probably going to match the hitbox roughly to the size of the bullet here, and I'm actually going to zero out each of these values. We're also going to add some actions. So going to actions, I'm going to drag this to the top, and I'm going to click this add action keyframe here. And I'm simply going to add an effect. And we'll use the effect Missile Fire Trail. So I have this little effect going on. And we're going to adjust the horizontal offset and the vertical offset so it's a little bit more behind. And we'll make sure that it's attached, because when this missile is moving, we want this to be flashing like this. And we'll give this a helpful tag called Fire Trail, just in case we need to reference it in any kind of variables or anything like that. All right, so we have the basic projectile here. And next, onto destroy, this will determine, in our particular case, the damage done and the sounds, etc. So let's create a new timeline, new actions timeline. And on this first point here, we're going to add an explosion effect. So let's look at the list of explosion effects here. Is there anything called missile explosion? Let's see what that looks like. Oh, that looks perfect. In terms of the offset, maybe we'll do a slight offset of 1 and 1. That should be good. And then it will not be attached. When it explodes, it will explode in place. So that looks pretty good. Next, we want explosion sound. So to do that, I'm going to go to the right here and select new sound, and I'm going to search for the word explosion. That's all right. I like explosion 2, so let's go with explosion 2. And then lastly, we're going to want to clear the player hit flag. This will allow for multiple hits. All right, and then we're not quite done yet because we have to add the hitbox for this. So let's do that. Let's go to hitboxes, go here and add a new hitbox. And we'll just adjust this hitbox a little bit, make it a little smaller, about the size of the explosion that we want. We'll call this a damage of 6, 5, we'll say 0.06 here, with no sounds or anything related to that, because the sounds are already being played here, so we don't need anything related to this particular hitbox regarding that. So then we'll add a, let's say after 5 frames, we'll have a empty keyframe to cut off that hitbox. And then up here on frame 5, we're actually going to create something that's kind of one of the more important actions on a projectile, and that is remove projectile from game. If you do not do this, projectiles will linger and linger and linger, and that can cause some instability and some unintended side effects. So you want to make sure you do that. So we kind of set up the basic parameters of our projectile. But the most important aspect of projectiles is properties. So here you can see we have kind of the characteristics of this projectile, how long it will last in seconds. whether or not it gets destroyed by hitting the player. In this case, we do. When it activates that first hitbox here, we want it to go to the destroy animation, so we do want that checked. For can hit creator, that would be something like a grenade, where maybe you wanted a risk and reward type situation where if the player held onto it for too long, it would damage him or herself. We're not going to worry about that though. Let's add a little bit of a buffer here. So there's basically a period where even if the projectile touches the hurt box of the player, it won't affect them. That's nice in the beginning, so that your projectile doesn't automatically hit your own character. That can happen sometimes. For damage to destroy, we're going to let anything destroy it. So the higher this is, the more has to be damaged for it to explode. We want really anything to make it explode. And we don't really want to affect the ultrafill in this particular case, but you can if you'd like. Stick when hitting player. So this would mean if the missile or the bullet in this case hit the person, it would stick to them. We don't want that, and it's not relevant because it gets destroyed when it hits the player anyways. For the stage interaction, let's set this to about 10, and let's set this to about 0. And what that's going to do is, this is setting the size of the collision hitbox basically for the projectile. And we're going to go ahead and also destroy contact when it goes on the ground, but if you check this off, it would continue to go along the ground at the speed that you set here. So if I turn this off and I set the speed to, like, I don't know, 10 or something, the missile would continue to glide along the ground and would not be destroyed. Then you have two options here. You have either physics-based movement and you have propulsion. These are two different kinds. You can't have them on at the same time, but we don't recommend it, because physics-based movement is something like Granite's boulder, where it uses gravity, and that kind of it determines the velocity, the fall speed, the gravity, the friction. All those things apply here. In this case, since we're using a missile or a bullet, we are not going to do that. So we're going to do a slight We'll do 0.4 negative for acceleration in the air. We'll set that to 0. Maybe max speeds like around 8 something. Minimum speed maybe around 5, something like that. All right, so now our projectile here is taking shape. I'm going to go ahead and save. All right, so we have our projectile created. We have basic deal for our bullet here active. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add that to an animation. So in this case, I want it to activate during this animation just around here where he's glowing, and I'm going to select this, and already I've got this effect that I've added and this sound, that sound here. And one thing I would mention too is I have an offset here. So if I were to zero this out, you can see the offset's kind of not in the right spot, so you might want to experiment and make sure the effect that you're applying lines up with your character. So once we've set all that up, we're going to want to add a create projectile action. So let's look for that. Or I'm sorry, not create effect, create projectile. Create projectile, this option right here. And from the drop down, you'll select the projectile. In this case, it's bullet. And what I like to do is I like to match the effect offset and then match those values to the projectile, which basically means that this coordinate here of 140 by 90, where you see this effect, that's where the bullet's going to come from. So by default, it would be kind of the center down here, and it wouldn't look quite right. But if you're able to kind of eyeball it with this effect, then you can figure out, oh, I want the projectile to come from there. So we now have created a projectile. We have now told it to exist at this particular frame here. So let's save and test it out. All right, so let's press B and try it out. Now look at that. We got ourselves a working bullet projectile. Pretty good. And it works. It explodes and makes a sound when it hits the player. Look at that. Not bad. Now, if you'd like, you can add additional things to it. If you wanted to make it a homing attack, you can adjust the homing range, the rate, and continue to home on the target, which means it will always do that until it's destroyed. Here we have a lifetime seconds of 3, so it wouldn't last too long anyways, but I'm going to turn this off and hit accept. So using this logic and all these bits of functionality, we hope you create all kinds of crazy and unique projectiles. Thank you for watching.